All right, so carbohydrates, again, context. So we've covered the formation of the macromolecules, dehydration synthesis. Right? Take small units, connects them into something larger. We've looked at the proteins, right? The large proteins built up of the small amino acids. We've looked at the large nucleic acids built up of the small nucleotides. And now we continue this process and we get into the sugars. Sugars, generic term, carbohydrates being the more proper term, right? Carbohydrates or sugars. Molecularly, carbohydrates are a lot simpler, right? So you survive the proteins, you survive nucleic acids. Now we get into something a little bit simpler, which are the sugars. Sugars are made up of 3 elements: carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, in what we call a 1-2-1 empirical formula. For every 1 carbon, we have double the number of hydrogens, and for every 1 carbon, we have the same number of oxygens. Right, so that's that 1-2-1 empirical formula. Carbohydrates are well known as far as energetics go. So I think you understand that if you give a child a lot of sweets, a lot of sugar right before bedtime, they're not going to fall asleep. They're going to be all energized, right? All hyper. So that's a well-known idea. So we look at carbs as their role in short-term energy. That's not the only thing that they're used for, though, right? In the body, they're also important in cellular marking and also structural. They help build certain things as well, right? But the primary thing actually is the energy. So energetics, and just like proteins, we had 4 structural levels for proteins: the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Well, we have something similar for carbs, but they're called saccharide levels, right? Saccharide. Saccharide is the Greek word for sugar. So a monosaccharide, mono, the Greek word for 1. So a monosaccharide would be 1 sugar unit. A disaccharide would be 2 sugar units combined together. So di means 2. Oligo doesn't have a specified number. It just means a little bit, a few, poquito, right? So oligoside or oligosaccharide implying a small number of sugar units bonded together, and then poly referring to many. So many sugar units combined together. So in order to understand the poly, the oligo, the disaccharides, we have to understand the idea of the monosaccharides. Over here, this is showing you the sort of the structural designation of a monosaccharide. For whatever reason, that hexagonal shape is very prevalent in chemistry and in biology. So we know that the sugars, the bases, right, our purine bases, our again, simple sugars here, we're going to see this shape very often. We see that again: carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, carbon 4, carbon 5, and carbon 6. So that hexagonal shape, and we're also going to see pentagonal shapes as well. So again, these are efficient shaped molecules, and they tend to repeat themselves in the different macromolecule categories. What is different, though, is the structural configuration and the elemental components, right? So if you notice in let's look at DNA, right? The bases, right? They contain nitrogen. Here we have no nitrogen. In proteins, they had that amino functional group. In H2, they have nitrogens. Carbohydrates, no nitrogen. So very simple, C, H, and O's. So monosaccharides, the simplest of the carbohydrates, right? So we can get simpler and still be talking about a sugar. So monosaccharides are our smallest sugar units. They're considered to be 1 sugar unit. They can exist perfectly fine by themselves. They don't have to reach a specified maturity level. They can function just as they are. Or they can start to undergo dehydration synthesis to form something more complex. Now, one of the critical monosaccharides that I want you to know is glucose. So glucose is a key factor in the condition we know of as diabetes, right? Glucose, blood sugar, right? This is what diabetics have to monitor, have to regulate, and it's this simple monosaccharide, a 6-carbon monosaccharide. So a 6-carbon monosaccharide would have 12 hydrogens, and a 6-carbon monosaccharide would have also 6 oxygens. So it's that 1-to-1 empirical ratio there. I'm not going to get into all the organic chemistry stuff. Just, again, if you were to draw this molecule out, it would look something like this. In real life, it's not linear. In real life, it starts to kind of bend and coil into that pentagonal, or I should say that hexagonal shape here. That sort of 6-sided kind of sort of figure. And again, just when you see those little hexagon shapes, understand they're talking about one simple sugar unit there. There are also 5 sugar units, right? We've talked about these. We've talked about deoxyribose and ribose. So deoxyribose and ribose that we learned in the prior discussion for the nucleotide structure. They contain 5 carbons, carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So they don't achieve that hexagonal shape. They're more of a pentagonal form. Now, something that I want you to start noticing on monosaccharides. Right? Monosaccharides are given a particular suffix, a last part of the word. And we look at that, those last 3 letters, OSE, right? Ose, pentose, sugars. Hexose, which are sugars. Specific hexose sugars, glucose, fructose, galactose, deoxyribose. So if you see 3 letters that end in OSE, you're talking about a carbohydrate, a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. If you're talking about ASE, right? Do you remember what ASE designates? I hope you told me, oh, that's an enzyme, right? A protein enzyme, right? That's correct. ASE is for enzymes, OSE then for carbohydrates. So there's our glucose, monosaccharide, 6-carbon, different shaped, but still 6-carbon fructose and 6-carbon galactose. And what these are basically are what we call isomers. They're the same molecular formula, C6H12O6, but the parts are in a little bit different places. So if you notice here, our carbonyl is on the 1st carbon. Here our carbonyl drops to the 2nd carbon, but still the same molecular formula, just different positions. Here, our hydroxyl is pointing to the right. Over here, our hydroxyl kind of shifted over and is pointing to the left. Not very big difference, but enough of a difference that the molecule does something a little bit slightly different, right? So isomers or stereoisomers, structural isomers, same molecular formula, just the parts are in little different spots, right? That's how we get these different shapes of these 6-carbon monosaccharides here. All right, so boring chemistry stuff, yeah? Let's get into the biology sort of implications, the links of monosaccharides into health, right? And we talk about diabetes. So diabetes is a medical condition that's been known for a long time. It's been known since the ancient Greeks, right? They didn't know all the details, right? We know more now what's happening with diabetes than what they knew in the past. But today we know that blood glucose must be regulated properly. And if it's not regulated properly, then we have a condition called diabetes. So in order to help regulate blood glucose, we need our pancreas to function properly. The pancreas will secrete the hormone insulin, right? Insulin then helps us to uptake. Insulin is going to act as a key to unlock little channels to allow glucose to come in. Right? So how can we make an analogy here? If, let's say you walk outside your house, right? You arrive, you get home from work, from wherever you get home, and you're just walking outside the yard, outside the front and the back. Well, that's good. You're getting exercise, but you don't want to be outside. You're tired. You want to go inside. So to go inside that house, you need to unlock the door with your key so you can get in. That's the same concept of normal insulin glucose sort of biology. So we eat, say you ate a good meal, there's a lot of sugars. So we have to have then the appropriate key, open up the little channels so that glucose doesn't stay in circulation. We don't want glucose in the bloodstream. We want glucose to enter into those cells. And that's the role of insulin. Insulin helps to open the channel, allow glucose in. If insulin is not doing its job, then you have the condition we call diabetes. So blood glucose stays in excess numbers in circulation. So if somebody is afflicted with diabetes, and just to kind of give you a little bit of an insight, diabetes can affect anyone, right? So anyone can have issues with the pancreas, with insulin. There are some genetic races that are more predisposed. So the African American race, the Hispanic culture are very prone to developing diabetes, right? One, the genetic predisposition, and two, the culture, right? If you come from the Hispanic culture, delicious foods, it's part of the culture, but it's not necessarily the most healthy foods, right? So a lot of these factors can kind of disrupt our normal physiology, right? And can trigger diabetes when we don't have diabetes initially. Some of the symptoms to look out for. So it seems kind of backwards, but a diabetic person exhibits this early on and this early on, right? So increased hunger and fatigue. So the patient seems very tired, right? And they seem very hungry. And if you know somebody is diabetic, maybe you have a diabetic in your family, you know they eat, and they eat a lot, right? So what happens, the cells are starving for glucose. Like, hey brain, we need to eat some food so we can get some energy. So the brain triggers that hunger response. We eat, and the diabetic person is not gonna then move the glucose into the cell. So there's a lot of glucose here, but it's not actually going into the cell. It's just kind of circling through the bloodstream. Since the cells aren't receiving glucose, they don't get energy. So that causes a lethargic, sort of fatigued individual. And we start to send another hunger response. Hey, excuse me, brain, I don't think you got the message. We need to eat. So that person eats some more, right? And they eat some more, and they eat some more, and they don't feel satiated. They don't feel full because their cells are still starving for energy. Now, so all this hunger, all this extra eating has made blood glucose increase in circulation. Now, to compensate for this, right, we have now very syrupy blood that the heart's having to pump. So the heart sort of coordinates with the kidneys, and they communicate and say, hey, you know what, kidneys, there's too much syrupy blood. We got to get rid of some of this glucose, right? So that triggers the kidneys to work very hard to excrete a lot of this glucose. So basically, a diabetic person urinates a lot of sugar. Right? That was how the ancient Greeks used to test for this. Right? They would, I don't know all the details, but they would have the patient urinate. They would subject the urine to ants. If there was a lot of sugar in the ants would kind of swarm around that urine, and that would be indicative that, yes, they have too much sugar that they're excreting out of the body. So again, been known for a long time, and a very, very simple test, a little ant urine test. So a lot of thirst, right? Drinking because they're so thirsty, trying to dilute the amount of thick, syrupy blood that they So all this extra work on the kidneys, again, starts to damage kidneys. We start to have urinary problems. We start to have kidney malfunction. And anything that gets injured in a diabetic individual takes a long time to heal, right? So because those cells are not getting enough energy to repair, they stay damaged for longer. And again, can become infected, can become more problematic. Yeah. So it's an ugly domino effect that can all be triggered back to that improper regulation of that little monosaccharide glucose. Now, again, we can get very specific. I'm not going to get so specific. I'm going to keep this kind of vague, a little bit broad. We're going to look at a couple of classes of diabetes, right? The types of diabetes. So we're going to say type 1. So diabetes type 1 is, again, we can go in there and break it up into a couple of other categories, but for now, we're going to keep it simple. Diabetes type 1 we associate as being a genetic form. So the child is born with diabetes. From day one of their life, they already have diabetes, right? That's a type 1. Or very, very early in life. Within the first couple of years of their life, the pancreas is damaged or the insulin is not properly formed, so they are diabetic from a very, very young age. At birth or very, very young age. We say that is this type 1. So if a person is type 1 diabetic, they can blame mom and dad for giving them very faulty genes. Yeah. A second type of diabetes, a different type of diabetes, is what we term as gestational diabetes. Gestation is a fancy word that means pregnancy. So there's going to be some moms that become pregnant, and as the baby is growing, it starts to disrupt normal physiology, right? You can imagine having another human growing inside you. It's going to disrupt the way things normally function. So the body's having to make more blood for the baby, having to make better distribution of energy, of oxygen, the umbilical circulation, all that. So things can get a little bit off homeostasis. Normally, in gestational diabetes, mom becomes diabetic. She's not regulating her blood glucose levels properly, and it's problematic for mom. And I guess for the baby, it's not too terribly bad if we want to analyze it in a couple of ways, right? So the baby is in an all-you-can-eat, buffet, right? All this extra glucose, all right. Then the baby's getting all this nutrition, which is then causing the baby to grow bigger, faster than what they're supposed to. So that's going to be a strain on mom during the labor process. So moms, it is the mom who has the diabetes. The baby doesn't have diabetes. The baby's just getting all of this nutrition, right? And the baby's getting too big too fast. Now, this is a picture of a child born from a mom who was gestationally diabetic, right? That's a big kid, right? 19-pound baby. That's huge compared to this other little normal-sized baby. So I hope that was a C-section. Please, for the sake of mom, I hope that was cesarean and not a natural labor, right? That would be quite difficult, I suspect. Also, if you notice, this baby's nice and calm on the left. This baby on the right, not enjoying life too much. I don't think any of you like to be on a diet. Some of you, when you're hungry, you get grouchy, right? Well, this baby's been having an excess of glucose throughout the whole pregnancy. Got very big, got used to eating all you can eat 24 hours a day. All of a sudden, they're born and they're basically put on a diet. So they're not receiving the amount of glucose that they're normally accustomed to, and really not enjoying life too much at that moment. So that's the idea of a problem that can be generated from gestational diabetes. Now, normally once the baby's born, mom's body kind of goes back to her normal state, and she's no longer diabetic normally, right? She goes back no longer diabetic. That introduces then now the third type, or what we call type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is a diabetes that develops later in life. this type of diabetes is linked back to very poor dietary habits, diets very high in fat, excessive amount of calories, too much just bad diet, and very insufficient exercise. So eating bad diet, all these extra calories, very, very minimal type of exercise, what tends to happen, the individual starts gaining weight. We start dealing with obesity, right? There's a very strong correlation between obesity and the late onset of diabetes type 2. So again, you are not born with type 2 diabetes. If you develop type 2 diabetes, you can't blame mom, you can't blame society, because you're the one that has been ingesting this excess unhealthy food and not exercising, right? So that's, again, type 2 diabetes is completely preventable, right? And it's just a terrible condition that we deal with here in El Paso with the Hispanic culture, African-American culture, Anglo culture. Is prevalent because in our society, and we can think back to this quarantine time, right? So we were eating, we couldn't go to the gym, you could run, you work out, but that takes a lot of motivation, right? And I don't know about you, but when I go jogging around town, I don't know, they give you kind of a hard time. Run, Forrest, run, La Migra, go faster, right? And it's like, so up in Oregon, it's a very different culture. Being outside, riding bicycles, jogging, it's much more supportive. Here in El Paso, not as much. And then at this point in the season, it's hot, right? You don't want to be outside. It's too hot running. You got to go very early or late at night, and then it may not be so safe. So it's a lot of cultural factors, the diet, the culture of activity within a city, within an environment. It's a lot of cultural situations that can lend themselves to higher and higher and higher amounts of type 2 diabetes. So the average age of the onset of type 2 diabetes is about 42. That was like a while back. That age is decreasing as our health is getting, worse and worse as a society. Type 2 diabetes is getting, more prevalent at a younger age. In the year 2019, last year in El Paso, there was an 11-year-old boy that was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So that's kind of not good, right? They were not born with it. They didn't have to have type 2 diabetes, but 11 years old, right? Playing video games all day, I suspect, bad diet, no exercise, and yeah, things got out of balance right away. And again, this whole life is going to have to deal then with this medical issue of testing for blood glucose levels, injecting insulin, the medical cost, the side effects of all these treatments. Again, this is 100% preventable. So backing up, type 1, you have no control over, just good genes or bad genes. Males, we can't get gestational. Ladies, I guess technically it's preventable. If you don't become pregnant, you can't get gestational diabetes, right? But if you become gestational diabetic, blame the baby daddy. Maybe that's, that's a good place to put the blame. Type 2 diabetes, look in the mirror and blame that person that's staring back if you develop type 2 diabetes. Yeah. So a lot of complications. We know that diabetes generates very poor wound healing. So again, this is preventable in type 2 diabetes, right? A lot of glaucoma issues, optic nerve, retinal problems with diabetes. Digits may have to be amputated, toes, the whole foot, the whole leg may have to be sort of amputated. So again, all of this is things that you can prevent. Because of the wear and tear on the kidneys, dialysis might be necessary. So basically you have to go sit for hours and hours and hours and let the blood route out of the body, go through a machine, a dialyzer. They will then infuse the clean blood back into the body because the kidneys are no longer doing that task for you. So again, please be conscious of your dietary habits, your exercise habits, and please don't put yourself through that misery of diabetes, right? 100% preventable. Type 2. So far, we're okay. Looking at the idea of monosaccharides, right? We didn't talk too much about the all the different types. We focus on glucose. That's the most prevalent, most important. Now, if we have glucose that teams up with a fructose, so monosaccharide plus monosaccharide dehydration synthesis, that yields then to what we call a disaccharide. So now we have two monosaccharides bonding together, generating a disaccharide. So we have a little bit of energy plus a little bit of energy yields even more energy. Right? Simple math. Two disaccharides that I think you're familiar with. I think you've heard about sucrose, and I think you've heard about lactose, right? OSE, sugar, OSE, sugar. Sucrose being table sugar, lactose being milk sugar. So there's some table sugar. You go sit down and drink tea. I don't know if you like to drink tea. I don't like to drink tea, but you sit down, maybe get some tea, you scoop in some of this sugar, right? You don't want to use the artificial sweeteners, you use actual cane sugar. That's sort of the idea of sucrose. What we have in candies, Jolly Ranchers, Skittles, all this, that sweet goodness, that is sucrose, right? Two monosaccharides covalently bonded together. Within this bond, right, they're going to give it a particular name, right? Two monosaccharides covalently bonded together. They're going to call that a covalent bond. We call it a covalent bond. The dietitians kind of sometimes use another term. They call them glycosidic linkages, right? Fancy term. I don't have a picture of that here, but this covalent bond between two monosaccharides known as a glycosidic linkage, we call it a covalent bond, right? Strong bond, electrons being shared. These linkages will help to form sucrose or lactose or maltose. It depends which two we put together. So glucose plus fructose yields sucrose. If we have a glucose plus galactose, that will then yield a lactose molecule. So it depends on what we put together as to what we end up with at the end. So again, we associate disaccharides as being energetic molecules there. I don't know if you can see this picture very well, but I thought this was an interesting analysis. So part of some science fair project, a student kind of measured out how much sugar is in each of these products, how many disaccharides are listed. And you can get this information just on the labels, right? You look at the labels, and again, if you were to consume a soda, you can see you're getting this much sugar. Well, some people say, I don't drink sodas, I drink juice. Well, juice also contains sugar, maybe not as much, but it does contain some. Milk, again, a lot of sugar, the lactose. So again, just understand we get sugar, we get sucrose from a lot of different sources of our diet, right? So again, we want to make sure that, yes, you eat healthy and eat what you do, eat what you want. Moderation is always good, and exercise is always sort of necessary as well. So we get into an interesting idea with lactose. Right? Lactose is a strange situation that humans deal with. So one, most of the lactose that we drink comes not from human milk. That's a natural source, right? But I think our society is so used to the way things work that if you went to the store and you saw human milk, like, ooh, I don't know which human gave me that milk. I'm not going to drink human milk. That's weird, right? But what I think is more weird is that we drink milk from a different species. But we're so used to that we associate that as being normal. What should be normal, human breast milk, we say, oh, no, I'm not going to buy that, right? So interesting ideas. Also, we drink lactose far later into life than we're supposed to, right? In nature, we drink milk when we're young, but the first year and a half, and after that, then we shift into a normal diet. So if you think of a wild tiger, wild lion, I don't know, a gazelle out in the plains, an elephant, whatever. These animals drink milk. These mammals drink milk for a little part of their life. And after they become adults, they never drink milk again. So the idea of becoming lactose intolerant is a very normal physiological process. We're supposed to become lactose intolerant. I don't know right now, some of you are normal maybe. Some of you stopped drinking as much milk, stopped eating as much dairy. And now if you were to drink milk or dairy, like, oh, you get that rumbling sound and, oh, you got to run to the bathroom, maybe something. That's normal. For those of you that can today, as an adult, continue to enjoy ice cream and cheese and pizza and milk, you are lactose tolerant, again, which is odd, right? And then we start to see, well, I wonder why there's so many diabetes cases out in society. Well, we're eating a lot of things that we're not supposed to be eating as adults, right? And we're eating excessive amounts of things that we're not supposed to be eating as adults. So a lot of things wrong with our diet, causing a lot of health concerns. And a lot of you that are going into the health field, I think you're going to have a good, job security. You're going to have jobs waiting for you when you graduate, because humans, we're going to do things wrong for a long time, right? So I hope that makes sense for now, the idea of our mono and disaccharides. I'm going to pause this video here, and then I'll address the oligos, and I'll address the polysaccharides in a different lecture. Okay? Alrighty. So I'll let you process that for a bit and keep an eye out for the next video.